3 disturbing true school lockdown stories. The blood on the classroom door was still wet when Principal Martinez's voice crackled through the intercom at exactly 1:47 p.m. This is not a drill. All teachers initiate code red lockdown procedures immediately. Barricade your doors, turn off all lights, do not make any sounds, help is coming. But here's what made 23 of us freeze in absolute terror as we huddled in the corner of Mrs. Peterson's chemistry lab. We could hear someone in the hallway methodically testing door handles, moving from classroom to classroom with the patience of a predator who knew exactly what they were looking for, and that someone was whistling a children's nursery rhyme. I'm about to share 3 true stories about school lockdowns that went far beyond the routine drills we've all experienced. These aren't stories about false alarms or miscommunications. These are accounts of real events where students and teachers faced genuine threats, where split-second decisions meant the difference between safety and tragedy, and where the illusion of school as a safe haven was shattered forever. Story 1, The Substitute's Secret. My name is Jessica Chen, and the first story takes place during my junior year at Roosevelt High School in Portland, Oregon. It was February 14th, 2023, a Tuesday that started like any other winter day in the Pacific Northwest. Cold, drizzly, and gray, with most students already counting the hours until Valentine's Day plans could begin. I was in 3rd period AP Biology with Mrs. Anderson, one of those teachers who made even the most complex scientific concepts seem fascinating. We were in the middle of studying cellular respiration when the classroom phone rang at 10:23 a.m. Mrs. Anderson answered with her usual professional tone, but I watched her face change as she listened to whoever was on the other end of the line. Her expression shifted from mild curiosity to confusion, then to something that looked like fear. "I understand," she said quietly into the phone. "Yes, immediately." She hung up and turned to face our class of 26 students, her hands visibly shaking as she reached for her keys. "We need to go into lockdown right now," she announced, her voice trying to maintain calm but failing to hide the urgency. "Everyone away from the windows and doors. Move to the back corner of the room." Roosevelt High had conducted lockdown drills monthly since I'd been a student there, so we all knew the procedure. But this felt different. Mrs. Anderson's fear was contagious, and as we huddled in the corner behind the lab tables, several students began whispering anxiously about what might be happening. "Is this a drill?" asked Tommy Martinez, a football player who usually projected confidence, but now looked genuinely scared. "No," Mrs. Anderson replied, and that single word sent a chill through all of us. She turned off the lights and locked the classroom door, then pulled down the window shade that would prevent anyone outside from seeing into our room. For the first 10 minutes, everything was quiet, except for the sound of rain against the windows and our own nervous breathing. Mrs. Anderson was monitoring her phone, presumably waiting for updates from the administration, while we sat in the darkened corner trying to process what was happening. Then we started hearing sounds in the hallway. Not the usual sounds of students and teachers moving between classes, but deliberate, measured footsteps that seemed to be moving very slowly from door to door. Occasionally, we'd hear the sound of someone testing a door handle, rattling it gently to see if it was locked. Mrs. Anderson pressed her finger to her lips, reminding us to stay completely silent, but I could see the terror in her eyes as she listened to the sounds in the hallway. The footsteps and door testing continued for what felt like hours but was probably only about 20 minutes. During that time, none of us moved or spoke. We just sat there in the darkness, listening to someone systematically check every classroom on our floor. Finally, the sound stopped, and we waited in continued silence for another 30 minutes until Principal Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom. "All clear. Teachers, please maintain lockdown positions until security personnel come to your classroom to provide an all clear." About 10 minutes later, 2 police officers and a school security guard came to our door. Mrs. Anderson verified their identities through the window before unlocking the classroom. "Everyone okay in here?" one of the officers asked as we emerged from our hiding spot, blinking in the fluorescent light that Mrs. Anderson had turned back on. We all nodded, though several students were clearly shaken by the experience. The officer continued, "We need to keep you here for a few more minutes while we complete our sweep of the building. Then we'll escort you to the gymnasium where parents can pick you up if they choose." As we waited, I overheard Mrs. Anderson talking quietly with the security guard about what had happened. "It was Mr. Henley," she said, "the substitute who was supposed to cover for Ms. Wilson in English today. Someone finally realized he wasn't actually a substitute teacher. The story that emerged over the next few hours was disturbing in ways that none of us could have imagined. A man named Robert Henley had appeared at the school's main office that morning claiming to be a substitute teacher scheduled to cover for Ms. Wilson, who had called in sick. He had seemingly legitimate identification and paperwork, and the overwhelmed office staff had given him Ms. Wilson's classroom keys and a copy of her lesson plans. But Ms. Wilson hadn't called in sick. She was at home, unaware that someone was impersonating a substitute teacher at her school. Mr. Henley spent first and second periods conducting normal English classes, apparently following the lesson plans and behaving like a typical substitute teacher. Students later reported that he seemed knowledgeable about literature and teaching, and nothing about his behavior had raised red flags. But during the passing period before third period, a genuine substitute teacher arrived at the main office with paperwork showing that she was scheduled to cover for Ms. Wilson that day. When the office staff tried to contact Ms. Wilson to clarify the confusion, she answered her phone from home and confirmed that she had never called in sick and had no idea who Robert Henley was. That's when the administration realized that a complete stranger had been teaching classes and had access to the entire school for over 2 hours. The lockdown was initiated immediately, but by the time security and police arrived, Robert Henley had disappeared. A search of the building found that he had apparently left through a side exit during the chaos of the lockdown announcement. What made the situation even more disturbing was what investigators found in Ms. Wilson's classroom after Henley had fled. He had used his access to the teacher's computer to print out class rosters and student information for multiple grades, not just the English classes he was supposed to be teaching. The printed documents suggested he had been gathering intelligence about students and their schedules. Most terrifying of all, he had taken photographs. The digital camera found in the classroom contained dozens of pictures of students, hallways, exit routes, and security cameras. It was clear that he hadn't been there to teach. He'd been conducting reconnaissance. The investigation revealed that Robert Henley wasn't his real name, and his identification was sophisticated forgeries. Security footage showed him arriving at the school in a stolen vehicle and demonstrated that he was familiar enough with the building layout to navigate it like someone who had studied it extensively. Police determined that he had been planning this infiltration for weeks or possibly months, learning about the school's substitute teacher procedures and timing his arrival to coincide with the genuine substitute schedule. But the most disturbing discovery came when investigators analyzed the route he had taken through the school during the lockdown. The footsteps we had heard in the hallway, the systematic testing of door handles, hadn't been random wandering by someone trying to escape. He had been checking specific classrooms, apparently looking for particular students or teachers. The printed class rosters found in Ms. Wilson's room had several names highlighted, including 3 students from my biology class. We had been targets of his search, though investigators never determined why. Robert Henley was never caught, despite an extensive manhunt and FBI involvement. The case remains open, and several other schools in the region have reported similar incidents where unauthorized individuals gained access by impersonating substitute teachers. The experience changed how I think about school security and the assumption that adults in educational settings are there for legitimate reasons. For weeks afterward, students and teachers were more suspicious of unfamiliar faces, and the substitute teacher approval process was completely overhauled. But what haunted me most was the realization of how vulnerable we all were during those 2 hours when a complete stranger with unknown motives had free access to our school and our information. Story 2. The Inside Threat. The second story takes place 6 months later at Jefferson Middle School in suburban Atlanta, where I was working as a student teacher in 8th grade social studies. My name is Michael Torres, and I was 22 years old, fresh out of college and excited about beginning my teaching career. Jefferson Middle School served about 800 students in grades 6 through 8, and it had a reputation as a well-run school with dedicated teachers and strong community support. I had been working with Mrs. Patricia Davis, a veteran teacher with 15 years of experience, and I felt like I was learning from one of the best educators in the district. November 8th, 2023, started as a normal Wednesday. I arrived at school around 7:15 a.m. to help Mrs. Davis prepare for the day's lessons, and students began arriving at 7:45 for the 8 a.m. start time. First and second periods went smoothly. We were in the middle of a unit on the Industrial Revolution, and the 8th graders were engaged in a project about working conditions in 19th century factories. Mrs. Davis was an expert at making historical topics relevant to modern students, and watching her teach was like attending a master class in education. Third period was my planning time, which I usually spent grading papers or preparing materials for upcoming lessons. But that morning, Mrs. Davis asked me to help her with a discipline issue involving one of our students, Tyler Jackson. Tyler was a 13-year-old 8th grader who had been having behavioral problems for several weeks. He was frequently disruptive in class, had been caught vandalizing school property, and had received multiple detentions for disrespecting teachers and fighting with other students. Tyler's been acting more aggressive lately, Mrs. Davis explained as we walked toward the guidance office. His parents are going through a divorce, and I think he's struggling with the stress. The counselor wants to discuss some intervention strategies. We met with the school counselor, Mrs. Jennifer Lopez, and Tyler's mother, Ms. Angela Jackson, to discuss a behavioral plan that might help Tyler work through his anger in more constructive ways. The meeting seemed to go well. Tyler admitted that he was angry about his parents' separation and agreed to weekly counseling sessions and daily check-ins with Mrs. Davis to monitor his progress. But as we were leaving the guidance office around 10:30 a.m., Tyler made a comment that should have been a red flag. "Maybe things would be better if some people just weren't around anymore," he said quietly, looking directly at Mrs. Davis. Mrs. Davis and I exchanged glances, but before we could address the comment, Tyler walked away toward his next class. "That was concerning," I said to Mrs. Davis. "Tyler says things like that when he's upset," she replied. "I'll keep an eye on him today and talk to Mrs. Lopez if his behavior escalates." But Tyler's behavior didn't escalate in the ways we expected. Instead, it went underground. During 4th period, while Mrs. Davis was teaching and I was observing from the back of the classroom, Tyler seemed unusually calm and focused. He participated in discussions, completed his assignments, and showed none of the disruptive behavior we'd been seeing for weeks. At the time, we interpreted this as a positive sign that the counseling session had been helpful. We were wrong. 5th period was lunch, and Mrs. Davis and I were eating in the teacher's lounge when we heard the first announcement over the intercom. "Attention all staff. We have reports of a student in distress in the main hallway. All teachers, please remain in your current locations while administration addresses the situation." This type of announcement wasn't uncommon. Middle school students sometimes had emotional breakdowns that required intervention from counselors or administrators, and the standard procedure was to keep other students and staff away while the situation was resolved. But 15 minutes later, a second announcement made it clear that something more serious was happening. "All staff, please initiate Code Yellow procedures immediately. Secure your classrooms and await further instructions." Code Yellow was a step below full lockdown, used when there was a potential threat that required increased security, but hadn't escalated to imminent danger. Mrs. Davis and I quickly returned to our classroom and locked the door. Through our classroom window, we could see police cars arriving in the school parking lot. Whatever was happening had escalated beyond the school's ability to handle it internally. Around 12:45 p.m., Principal Williams's voice came over the intercom with an announcement that sent chills through the entire school. "We are now implementing Code Red lockdown procedures. All students and staff should move away from windows and doors immediately. This is not a drill." Mrs. Davis and I looked at each other in confusion. We were alone in our classroom during the lunch period, so there were no students to secure, but the gravity of a Code Red during school hours was terrifying. We moved away from the windows and called the main office for more information, but the phone lines were busy. All we could do was wait and listen to the sounds of increased police activity outside. About 20 minutes into the lockdown, Mrs. Davis received a text message from Mrs. Lopez, the guidance counselor, that explained what was happening. Tyler Jackson barricaded himself in the computer lab with a weapon. Police negotiator en route. Stay secured. The revelation that Tyler was the source of the lockdown hit us both like a physical blow. This was the same student we'd been trying to help just hours earlier, the 13-year-old boy who had seemed calmer and more focused after his counseling session. Over the next 2 hours, while we remained locked in our classroom, details of the situation slowly emerged through text messages from other staff members and whispered phone conversations. Tyler had gone to the computer lab during lunch, apparently with a plan he had been developing for weeks. He had brought a knife from home and had barricaded the door using desks and chairs, trapping himself inside with the computer equipment. But the weapon wasn't the most disturbing part of his plan. Tyler had been using the computers to create what investigators later described as a target list of students and teachers he blamed for his problems. Mrs. Davis was at the top of that list. The documents Tyler created during those 2 hours in the computer lab detailed his grievances against specific people and outlined plans for confronting them. The knife was apparently meant for Mrs. Davis, who Tyler blamed for his recent disciplinary problems and academic struggles. But Tyler's plan had a psychological component that was even more disturbing than the physical threat. He had been secretly recording conversations with teachers and students using his phone, then editing the audio to make it sound like people were saying cruel things about him. These fabricated recordings had been fueling his anger and paranoia for weeks. The computer lab gave Tyler access to more sophisticated editing software, and he spent those 2 hours creating an elaborate presentation that combined his fake audio recordings with photos of his targets, essentially building a case for why he felt justified in planning violence against them. The police negotiator who eventually convinced Tyler to surrender described the computer lab as looking like the workspace of someone planning a domestic terrorism attack. The walls were covered with printed photos, edited documents, and handwritten notes that demonstrated months of planning and obsessive focus on his perceived enemies. Tyler had also used the school's computers to research other school violence incidents, apparently studying methods and outcomes to inform his own planning. The lockdown ended around 3:15 p.m. when Tyler finally agreed to surrender peacefully. He was arrested and eventually charged as a juvenile with making terroristic threats and weapons possession on school property. But the psychological investigation that followed revealed the most disturbing aspects of the case. Tyler had been manipulating adults throughout the planning process, appearing to cooperate with counseling and behavioral interventions, while secretly escalating his preparations for violence. The morning meeting where he seemed to accept help and agree to counseling had actually been part of his plan. He had used the session to gather information about school procedures and to identify when and where he would have the best access to his targets. His calm behavior in fourth period hadn't been a sign of improvement. It had been the composure of someone who believed he was hours away from executing a plan for violence. Most disturbing of all, Tyler had been testing security responses by deliberately triggering minor disciplinary incidents over the previous weeks. Each detention, each trip to the principal's office, each interaction with school security had been an opportunity to study procedures and identify vulnerabilities. The investigation revealed that Tyler had detailed knowledge of the school's lockdown procedures, the response times of local police, and the specific locations where students and teachers would be most vulnerable during an emergency. Mrs. Davis took a leave of absence for the rest of the school year and eventually transferred to a different district. The experience of being specifically targeted by a student she had been trying to help was too traumatic for her to continue working at Jefferson Middle School. I finished my student teaching assignment, but the experience changed my perspective on classroom management and student relationships. The realization that a 13-year-old could plan and almost execute a sophisticated attack while appearing to cooperate with help was deeply unsettling. Tyler was eventually sentenced to juvenile detention and mandatory psychological treatment, but experts who evaluated him said that his level of planning and manipulation was unusual for someone his age and suggested that he would require long-term supervision and treatment. The case led to changes in how the school district handles behavioral interventions and threat assessments, but it also raised uncomfortable questions about the balance between helping troubled students and protecting the safety of the school community. Story 3. The Network. The third and most disturbing story takes place at Riverside High School in Northern California, where I worked as a security consultant helping schools improve their emergency response procedures. My name is Rebecca Martinez, and I had 15 years of experience in school security when I was brought in to evaluate Riverside's protocols in March 2024. Riverside High School was a large, comprehensive high school serving about 2,200 students in grades 9 through 12. It was located in an affluent suburban community and had a reputation for academic excellence and well-funded programs. The school had contacted my consulting firm after a series of minor security incidents that administrators felt might be connected. Nothing serious enough to warrant major concern individually, but when taken together, they suggested a pattern that needed investigation. Over the previous 3 months, there had been several reports of unauthorized individuals on campus, security cameras that had been tampered with, and students receiving anonymous messages that contained detailed information about their daily routines. My initial assessment revealed that Riverside had excellent security systems in theory, but significant gaps in implementation. Door access controls weren't being used consistently, visitor management was informal, and communication between security personnel and teachers was sporadic. I spent 2 weeks observing daily operations, interviewing staff and students, and reviewing security footage to identify vulnerabilities and develop recommendations for improvement. But on March 19, 2024, what we thought was a routine security assessment became the center of one of the most complex and disturbing school threats I'd ever encountered. I was in the main office reviewing visitor logs with Principal Sandra Kim when the first 911 call came in at 11:17 a.m. A parent calling from her workplace reported that she had received a text message that appeared to be from her daughter, a sophomore at Riverside, saying that there was an active shooter in the school and that students were barricaded in classrooms. Principal Kim immediately tried to contact the daughter, but the student was in class and her phone was turned off according to school policy. The parents' panic was understandable, but there were no signs of any emergency at the school. Within minutes, 3 more parents called with similar reports. They had all received text messages that appeared to be from their children, describing an active shooter situation and asking parents to call police. But all of the students mentioned by the panicked parents were accounted for and safe in their classrooms, following normal daily routines with no awareness that their parents thought they were in danger. Principal Kim made the decision to initiate a precautionary code yellow. While we investigated what was happening, it was possible that someone was using spoofed phone numbers to send fake emergency messages, but we needed to verify that all students were actually safe. That's when we discovered the scope of what we were dealing with. The fake text messages weren't random pranks. They contained detailed information about specific students, their class schedules, their typical locations during different periods, and their relationships with teachers and other students. Someone had been gathering intelligence about Riverside High School students for months, building detailed profiles that allowed them to create convincing emergency messages that would terrify parents and trigger massive law enforcement responses. But the text messages were just the beginning. As we were trying to understand the source of the fake emergency reports, the real emergency began. At 11:45 a.m., every computer in the school's network simultaneously displayed the same message. Attention Riverside High School. Your security is a lie. We have been watching you for months. We know everything about your students, your teachers, your procedures. Today you will learn how vulnerable you really are. The lockdown starts now. Immediately after the message appeared, all of the school's electronic door locks activated simultaneously, sealing every classroom, office, and common area. Students and teachers found themselves trapped wherever they happened to be when the system engaged. The fire alarms began sounding, but the door locks prevented normal evacuation procedures. The intercom system started broadcasting recordings of fake emergency announcements designed to create panic and confusion. But the most disturbing element was that the people responsible for the attack were providing live commentary. A voice came over the intercom system, clearly not a recording, speaking directly to the school community. Good morning, Riverside High School. For the past 4 months, we have been studying your security, your procedures, and your people. Today's exercise is a demonstration of how easily your safety systems can be turned against you. The voice continued, "We are not on your campus. We are not a physical threat to anyone, but we have complete control of your building systems, your communications, and your security cameras. You are trapped in your own school." Principal Kim tried to use her administrative override codes to unlock the doors, but the system didn't respond. The landline phones were dead and cell phone service was being jammed. From my position in the main office, I could see through the windows that police cars were arriving in response to the fake text messages parents had received. But the officers couldn't enter the building because the main doors were electronically locked. The voice over the intercom system addressed this directly. "The police outside cannot help you. They do not have the codes to override our control of your systems. We will release you when we have finished our demonstration, but first you need to understand how completely we have compromised your security." Over the next 2 hours, the people controlling the school systems provided a terrifying tutorial on how they had gained access to Riverside's network and gathered intelligence on the school community. They had been infiltrating the school's computer systems for months, using sophisticated hacking techniques to access student records, employee files, security camera footage, and internal communications. They had created detailed profiles of hundreds of students and staff members, including personal information that should never have been accessible to outsiders. They demonstrated their knowledge by reading personal emails between teachers, describing private conversations that had taken place in supposedly secure administrative meetings, and revealing sensitive information about students' academic and disciplinary records. But the most disturbing revelation was that they had been physically accessing the school. as well as hacking it electronically. The voice over the intercom explained that they had been placing hidden cameras and listening devices throughout the school for weeks, using information gathered from the computer systems to identify blind spots in security coverage. They had been inside classrooms, offices, and common areas while students and staff were present, installing equipment that allowed them to monitor daily activities and conversations. To prove this claim, they began playing audio recordings of private conversations between students, between teachers, and between administrators that had clearly been captured from inside the school building. The psychological impact of hearing their own voices played back to them was devastating for everyone trapped in the building. Students were crying, teachers were panicking, and even experienced administrators like Principal Kim were visibly shaken. The attackers explained that their goal was to demonstrate how false security can be more dangerous than no security at all. "You trusted your electronic systems to protect you," the voice said. "But every one of those systems became a weapon we could use against you. Your door locks became our prison bars. Your intercom became our broadcasting system. Your security cameras became our surveillance network." They continued. "Most dangerous of all, you trusted that the adults in your building were there for legitimate reasons. But we have been among you for months, observing, recording, and planning this demonstration." Around 2 p.m., after holding the entire school hostage for over 2 hours, the attackers finally released control of the building systems. The door locks disengaged, the fire alarm stopped, and the intercom returned to normal operation. But before ending their demonstration, they left a final message. "We could have done anything we wanted during these 2 hours. We could have accessed any information, contacted anyone, or caused any type of panic. Remember this feeling of helplessness the next time you assume that electronic security makes you safe." The FBI investigation that followed revealed that the attack had been carried out by a group of former students and community members who had been planning the demonstration for over a year. They had used a combination of social engineering, technical hacking, and physical infiltration to gain unprecedented access to the school's systems and information. The group's leader was a former Riverside student who had graduated 3 years earlier and had been working as a cybersecurity consultant for private companies. He claimed that the attack was intended as a white hat demonstration designed to expose security vulnerabilities before they could be exploited by genuinely malicious actors. But the psychological trauma inflicted on students, staff, and families was very real, regardless of the attackers' stated intentions. The investigation revealed that the group had indeed been accessing the school for months without detection, gathering intelligence and installing surveillance equipment throughout the building. They had created detailed dossiers on hundreds of community members, including information that could have been used for identity theft, blackmail, or more serious forms of harassment. Most disturbing of all, they had tested their ability to impersonate school officials and communicate with students and families, suggesting that their capabilities extended far beyond the demonstration they had conducted. 7 members of the group were eventually arrested and charged with multiple felonies related to computer crimes, breaking and entering, and terroristic threats. But the damage to the school community's sense of security was permanent. Many families transferred their children to other schools, several teachers resigned, and the district was forced to completely overhaul its security systems and procedures. The incident raised fundamental questions about the balance between security and accessibility in educational settings, and about the vulnerability of schools to sophisticated attacks by technically skilled adversaries. Conclusion: living with changed reality. These 3 stories represent different types of threats that schools face in an era where traditional security measures are often inadequate to address modern dangers. The substitute teacher infiltration at Roosevelt High demonstrated how social engineering can defeat even careful vetting procedures, allowing dangerous individuals to gain access to schools and students. Tyler Jackson's planned attack at Jefferson Middle School revealed how troubled students can manipulate helping relationships while secretly planning violence, and how behavioral interventions can actually provide intelligence that makes attacks more likely to succeed. The network takeover at Riverside High School showed how technological dependence can create vulnerabilities that sophisticated adversaries can exploit to gain complete control over school environments. What all 3 incidents have in common is that they challenged basic assumptions about school security and demonstrated that determined attackers can find ways to defeat systems that seem comprehensive and effective. They also illustrate how school violence and security threats have evolved beyond the stereotypical image of an armed intruder entering from outside. Modern threats are often more sophisticated, more carefully planned, and more difficult to detect and prevent. The psychological impact of these experiences on students, teachers, and families extends far beyond the immediate incidents. They create lasting anxiety about school safety and change the fundamental relationship between educational communities and their environments. But perhaps most importantly, these stories demonstrate the resilience and professionalism of educators and students who faced extraordinary circumstances with courage and determination to protect each other. The teachers, administrators, and security personnel in each of these situations made difficult decisions under extreme pressure, and their actions undoubtedly prevented more serious outcomes. As someone who has worked in school security for over 15 years, I've learned that there are no perfect solutions to the challenges schools face, but awareness of the types of threats that exist, combined with comprehensive planning and regular training, can make the difference between tragedy and survival. The goal isn't to create fortress-like schools that feel like prisons, but rather to develop adaptive security measures that can respond effectively to a wide range of potential threats, while preserving the open, nurturing environment that makes education possible. These stories are disturbing, but they're also reminders of the importance of vigilance, preparation, and the courage of ordinary people who choose to protect others when extraordinary circumstances demand it.